Hello. Is this on?
The Marc Berman Show is always on. Go to marcberman.com for our podcasts of our past shows and interviews.
Welcome to the Marc Berman Podcast. This is my 2010 interview with Walt Parazaider, founding member of Chicago. We talk about everything. What does 25 or 6 to 4 really mean? Some of his greatest memories of being on the road and touring with the band, how the band got started, and so much more. I hope you enjoy this interview. Walt was really open and really talked about things you won't hear in any other interview. And for more about Chicago, go to chicagotheband.com. For more Berman podcast and video, go to marcberman.com. Enjoy the interview. My next guest is a founding member of one of the most popular rock bands of all time. They've sold out concert halls for 5 decades, a Grammy Award, multiple American Music Awards, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a Chicago street dedicated in their honor. Record sales top the 100 million mark and include 21 top 10 singles, 5 consecutive number 1 albums, 11 number 1 singles, 5 gold singles, an incredible 25 of their 32 albums have been certified platinum, and the band has a total of 47 gold and platinum awards. There aren't many bands that could boast all of that. I have Walt Parazaider from Chicago here on AC Plugged In.
Well, I got to tell you, Mark, are you sure that's us? All that stuff. It's a pleasure to be talking to you, Mark, and it's a pleasure to be anywhere 43 years later. And one thing that I have to share with you and your listeners is that we've been fortunate, thanks to all of you, to have a job for 43 straight years, and it's all thanks to the folks out there. Everything that you read was made possible by all the nice people.
And 5 decades of amazing music.
And it's, you know what, and here we are talking about something that, again, we're allowed to do because of everybody there, and it's something that we love. And, hey, we're going to do it till we get it right, and may we never. But we're having a lot of fun trying.
Well, we're going to reminisce a little bit. But first, where did your interest in music come from, and at what age?
Well, it was about, I'd say as soon as I could remember. I lived on the inner west side of Chicago, and one of those interesting neighborhoods, but it was at the time a United Nations neighborhood where everybody got along and everything. But my dad was a trumpet player and was for 70 years, a big 6'6" guy, and he used to have rehearsals with his band at our place, and I'd go out and see him play. And what killed me was just whether they were rehearsing or playing, they were having so much fun, and it translated to the crowd, and they were having so much fun that I went, man, this is something that I got to try this out. And at the age of 9, I was blessed with part of my dad's talent, because he was just amazing. He could have been a big band player, but he married Mom and had my sister and myself. But at 9, I picked up the clarinet, and found out that I was a prodigious clarinet player, and was studying with a fellow in the symphony by the time I was, I think, about 12 or something like that. But when I was about 11, Mark, I went to a rock and roll dance. And, and it sort of changed my life in a way, although I still have a love for classical music and have a degree, performance degree in it. And I saw that the saxophone player at that rock and roll dance got girls. And to me, and I'm not kidding. And I went, I said to my dad, I said, hey, you think the saxophone player in your band would show me a few things, and would he have a spare sax? And at the age of 13, in a very controlled environment, my dad let me play in nightclubs. And that started, and I'm not ashamed to say it, that was a good 52 years ago.
Keep in mind, this is my interview with Walt Parazaider of Chicago from 2010.
So,
Wow.
it's that was where I went wrong, and along the way I did pursue that classical degree and went to school and all that stuff. But my early recollections of my dad playing and the support I had from my mom and dad, to play music and to go to college for it in an era, the 50s and 60s, where people had that European attitude. You should be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that instead of music, because that's child's play. But that's how I got started, and I got hooked. I saw that my dad made people happy, and he made them happy till he was 90 years old, playing trumpet.
God bless him.
God, you know what? I say the same thing, and that's why, you know what? You're going to see us, and we're going to bug you for many more years to come because we're having so much fun. People say, "When are you going to stop?" And I asked B.B. King and my dad that, and I said, "When are you going to retire?" And they both said, "To what?" And and they're right. They said, "I'm going to do this." They said both of them at the same time, "I'm going to do this until I can't do it anymore."
Walt actually retired from touring in 2017, and you can find him on Chicago's Tribute to Founding Members page alongside Terry Kath, Daniel Serafin, and Peter Cetera.
And that is another aspect of a Chicago concert. They're fun, and everybody on stage actually you feel is enjoying being where they are, doing what they're doing. You feel that at a Chicago concert.
It's, you know what, I hate to use a 60s phrase, it's a happening, but it's a party. And you know what? We're there and we're in the happiness business, so we're there to have a nice time, a great time with that audience, and seeing them smile back at us or see us, play a song that all of a sudden either people are cuddling up to or getting up and dancing on their seats to, because it just reminds them of a time in their life that was, a good time, and sometimes it's a bad time, and they say, you got us out of a bad time, and thanks for sticking around and helping us out and all this. It's really very gratifying, Mark. And it's so much fun. I never go to work. I go to play.
And and it comes through. You're a founding member of Chicago. Who was there with you in the beginning, and whose house did Chicago begin in?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. It's yours truly.
Oh.
In fact, I have a lady, Jacqueline, that has put up with me longer than the band's been together, and we had an apartment, and we started the band back in February 15th of 1967, and had the first rehearsals in my mom and dad's basement, which they thought the refrigerator and the stove were going to jump over and fall down in the kitchen and everything fall over. And I can tell you the truth, we've got Robert Lamb, Jimmy Pankow, and Lee Loughnane, the horn section and keyboardist Robert Lamb, and the full horn section, which is just amazing, is still with us today. 4 out of the 6 original members that sat around my apartment kitchen table.
As of August 2023, Robert Lamb, Lee Loughnane, and James Pankow are still performing with Chicago.
And shook hands, looked at each other, and said, "Let's be the best band we possibly can be."
How did you all meet?
Well, it was along the way, our late guitar player, Terry Kath, and I had gone to a recording session around, I think we were 16 or 17 years old, and we didn't like each other right off the bat, but we ended up doing the recording session, and the guy that was sort of an Elvis Presley look-alike and sound-alike put a band together, and he needed a saxophone player and guitar player, so he hired Terry and myself, and we became fast friends, and ended up, taking every solo, saxophone and guitar solo off of every record that we possibly could, and along the way just shook hands and just said, "Hey, wherever we go, we're going to go together." And we went through about 3 or 4 bands together. Dick Clark's touring band that had backed up the Shirelles, and Tom Jones when he had one hit, and other bands like that, and just had a ball until we ran into Lee Loughnane, who was in another band in Chicago, who'd come and sit in, and he was a trumpet player. And all of a sudden we're sitting at school one day, and this trombonist comes in a pair of pegger pants and Docker shoes and penny loafers and all this, and I'm going, this is very interesting, because I was sort of the Cabretta leather pompadour type guy at that time. A little greasy, if you want to say, and it was Jimmy Pankow, and I heard him playing in a practice room, and then I talked to him, and I thought, geez, we've got we've got a guitar player, we've got 3 horn players, we had a drummer that came along the way too, with a band before that in the band, and all of a sudden, we had basically a band except for a keyboard player. And I think I went on the north side. I hope I'm not boring you with the story.
Listen, my audience are mostly musicians in Atlantic City.
Well, you know what? Then you know what I tell you. Then I got to say hello to the brotherhood, and I'll continue the story, because all of us know one thing. It's great to have a gig, but my dad always said one thing about a gig. As I digress here for a second, how do you make a musician complain? give him a gig. But that's
right. Okay,
that's another story. But putting things together, the Brotherhood would understand this. I went out to the North Side and heard about a guy named Bobby Charles, who was really, had a band, I think a Highwaymen or something like that, and he was singing, singing up a storm and playing keyboards and playing an organ and everything. And I thought, well, this would be the sixth guy in the band, and if I could see if since he plays a C3 or a B3 organ, if he could play bass pedals, we could eliminate a bass player and not cut the pie so many ways, that we'd all get 10 cents out of the gigs, which your musicians in Atlantic City would appreciate there. So I went out and listened to him once, and he forgot this story, and I told him just a short while ago. He says, "How did you get a hold of me?" And I said, "Well, I went one time and I heard you play, and I really thought you were really good at what you did and everything, but I had to go back a second time just to make sure it wasn't a fluke, and just and make sure my ears were held on straight and everything." And I think I even talked to him briefly, and I got his phone number, and I asked him if he played bass pedals. Now, he told me years later that he didn't play bass pedals at all, but when I said we were going to be the American Beatles with horns and be the best band ever, and and you know how you are when you're a teenager and you're just full of what and vinegar.
That's right.
He said, "I believed you." He said, and I would have said anything that I did anything, that I played upside down in the shower and sang and played. He said, "I never played a bass pedal in my life. But I wasn't going to let you were so positive. Sure. I wasn't going to let this opportunity go by." So that's when I set the date, the day after Valentine's Day, because I didn't think the guys had come on Valentine's Day. They had girlfriends and everything, and all of that. And I was married, and I didn't want to have a frying pan thrown at me at that time, although, bless her heart, Jacqueline's typed the contracts when I booked the band when we started. But we sat around on February 15th, as I said, in 1967, and I just said, we're going to put the best band together we can possibly do, and once you give me a handshake, that's going to be it, and if you ever want out, all you have to do is ask out.
Well, I just want to touch on this for 1 second. Founding member and guitarist Terry Kath's death, I'll be honest, it was devastating, naturally, to the band, friends, family, and us fans around the world, because he was the greatest. He was great, just tremendous. You're exactly right. I've never seen anybody so dedicated to his instrument, and you're talking to one that really has a respect for music. But he was so good at what he did that when Jimi Hendrix tapped me on the shoulder back at the Whiskey A Go Go when we were doing off nights when we moved to California, and I turned around and I thought Hendrix here, he had Purple Haze, he was going to go blue and make me invisible or something. And he looked at me and he says, the horns are one set of horns. You sound so good together, and that guitar player is better than me. I want to take you out on the road as my opening act, and then I want to do an album with the horns. And I looked at him, and I couldn't believe he was saying this. And I said, if you're serious about this, and I'll know, here's our manager's phone number. And if you're not, you're just another one of the BSers that came around just sort of stroking us or whatever. And you know what? He called the manager the next day. We did go on the road with Jimi Hendrix and open for him. And, here we are, a bar band playing in front of 20,000 people each night, and got to hear him play. And he just was amazing when he said that about Terry. And the unfortunate thing is, we had a relationship there with Jimmy. He was a friend. And the Horns never got a chance to do that album because he passed early, as did Terry. So, Terry, I think there'd be a lot of people that would agree in your audience, and you have musicians that was a great loss musically, and was a loss to a brother in a band that we thought maybe that was the way the band should end, losing an original member, and maybe we should stop there. And then later on, people in the business, from Doc Severinsen to other musicians, said, you owe it to all of us, and to the memory of Terry. He would have wanted you to go on, that you should go on and make some more music. You owe it to all of us. And, in your recordings, he does live on, because when you're listening to CTA, the albums he's on, he comes through, and he's remembered.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. It's something that, when you have a loved one and a person that you're a kid with just about and everything, and you think about them all the time, and then we're so subjective, when you say something so kind and objective about the band, that, it just makes my day. Because he's a guy that, we miss him all the time. Terry was there from the start and was a very candid, no-nonsense guy. If you asked him a question, you were going to get a straight answer whether you liked it or not.
And you know what? It's great to remember him, and I'm glad that we could in this interview so that others can also feel what we are right now. Your first album was a double album, and that was rare. Nobody came out with a double album as their first album. Whose idea was that?
You know what? How did the double album come about? I didn't hear you there. It's it was a thing that we had so much material. We had moved out to California, and we thought, well, we could go to the East Coast or the West Coast, and we'll starve to death on either coast, but we won't freeze to death in Southern California. So we went out, and all we did was rehearse and write music, and we had already in Chicago had worked up original arrangements of tunes and everything. So all of a sudden we had this abundance of material, and we got in the studio, and we realized, that to make a whole statement it would be a half a statement if we just did one disc. And it's funny saying one record at this time and in this day and age, but that's what it was. So we actually talked to the record company, and I don't say good for us, but we believed in it so much we cut our royalties on the double album, because they said, who do they think they are? The Beatles had just put out the White Album, and ours was actually a black album. So you want to talk about yin and yang or whatever, but we believed in it so much that we figured this music has to get out as all one statement, one story, and thank goodness that it did. It was funny, due to our touring 300 days a year for about 2-3 years or whatever. That album was released, and I think the album was. I know the album was a hit, and it was a hit and charted in '69. But we actually went back after the success of "Make Me Smile," which was our first single off the second album. Went back and re-released a few songs. Does anybody know what time it is? And Beginnings and tunes off of there that became hits as. Subsequently, after the second album was out there. But we were so proud of that first album, and I have to tell you, Mark, it was one of those things where we didn't know what the heck we were really doing.
Well, you must have, because you followed it up with 3 more double albums. I mean, that's incredible.
Well, we were, that was still an overflow of music that we had. But it was funny, even though we had recorded with different bands or whatever, I just remember doing, does anybody know what time it is? All of us in the big room, Studio A at Columbia, where Janis Joplin recorded, and Simon and Garfunkel and people like that. And I knew that I didn't want to look at the other guys in the room, and they didn't want to look back because we were afraid we'd look at each other and we'd make the other guy make a mistake. So it was that's a little sidelight story, but first song we ever recorded was in that room, and it was "Does Anybody Know What Time It Was?" And we were scared, at that time.
I'm sure. It's all new, but you know what? The end result is amazing. Now, I have to go to the second album, which was called Chicago, but it wasn't Chicago 2. It was just Chicago, because your first album was Chicago Transit Authority.
Right.
And then they were, but on that, the world fell in love with Color My World. And you have that flute solo at the end that you'd hear people whistling in malls.
It really is. You know what? It truly is amazing, and there is a story there, and it's going to sound almost like you set me up for this, and I made this story up. But honestly, what happened there is we were all living in a house at one time, and then I was able to bring my wife out, and I was living right around the corner from the house where some of the guys were living, and Jimmy Pankow was in that house, and he called me about 10 in the morning, and he said, "I've been sort of working most of the night on a thing called a ballet, and I've got this one movement with arpeggios, and it's a real pretty part of the ballet. And would you bring your flute down, and I'd like to work on this and see what we come up with." So, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 hours later, the arpeggios, I said, well, maybe we put something here, and, I've got the flute out and all this. And then he gave me a quizzical look, and he went, is any of this any deleted expletive good? Talking about Color My World.
Sure.
And I looked at him, and this was just really, honestly, a positive statement because we didn't have a cent to our name, and all we had was the music and everything. I looked at him and I said, one day this is going to make me famous.
Well, look what happened.
And there you have it. And it's the honest to God truth. And he just looked. It was so funny. He couldn't see what he had in front of him, and I did. What he created there was, first of all, a ballet, which along with Tommy, the Who's Tommy and stuff. These were things that were unheard of in rock and roll. And then to do Color My World, and to have the writer look at me quizzically and say, "Is this any darn good?" And how could I respond but in a positive way? I'd say, would slap him on the back and say, "You're right. It isn't any darn good. I'm going to go back to the house and have lunch or dinner or whatever it was." And it just became one of those anthems that people just said, "Geez, we got married to that song."
That's right. I was going to say it became one of those slow songs, and
yes,
in history, people that's what they asked for. What's the meaning of 25 or 6 to 4?
Well, you know what? I've had everything. Everybody said, "Oh, it's everything from a drug song to." One time I talked to England, and they said, "I say, old chap, we know what that song is all about." And I says, "Well, what do you think it is?" And it says, "It's odds on a horse race." And really, what it is, Mark, is it's Robert Lamb was writing a song, and it's a song about writing a song, and it just happens to be he was trying to finish it, and it was either 25. When he looked, bleary-eyed at the clock, it was either 25 or 6 to 4 in the morning.
And it's just that simple.
It is just that simple, but it was everything from a drug song to odds on a horse race to, everybody had a slant on it. But,
okay, so it didn't mean Paul is dead.
No, you know what? Exactly. When I thought about that, I was sort of flattered that we were in the company of 4 people that we admired quite well and got to meet over the years, along with Sir George Martin and everything. But you're right; it didn't mean Paul was dead, or that somebody in the band had eczema or something like that. All that crazy stuff. It was just 25 or 6 to 4 in the morning.
And you heard it here on Atlantic City Plugged In. How many times did you guys do Ed Sullivan?
You know what? We never did, and I think that was a mistake, and I'm not going to blame it on anybody else, but the buck stops with us. And there was just talk that, the little speaker on a television, maybe a big band like us wouldn't translate on that.
Wow.
But every time I see, some of those, the stations run, shows with all the people that performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, that would have been it would have been a fun thing to have done. And we were offered to do it and
sure.
talk to the sound man on that show. He says, "Hey, I've mixed the Beatles. I can mix you guys. You just got horns. We just add horns to this." And he was probably right, but that's a true story on it.
What's the most memorable concert you've played? Now, how can I ask that? You've been doing it 5 decades, but I have to. Is there something in all this time that really stands out?
You're listening to my 2010 Timeless interview with founding member of Chicago, Walt Parazaider. Remember, dates and times in this interview are from 2010. For up-to-the-minute information on Chicago and tours, go to chicagotheband.com. Well,
there's a few, but I'm going to tell you there's one. And since I'm talking to you and you're in Atlantic City and close to Philadelphia, back in the 80s, there was the 200th year commemoration of the Constitution of the United States. We were asked to close a show that had Grover Alexander on it and a bunch of people. And there were 1 million people there down the streets, and the stage, our back was to the museum where they put up Stallone's statue of Rocky.
Yes.
And, and they I don't know how we got in there, but I went down earlier in the day and had done some interviews. They had speakers lined up down the avenues for miles. And I remember having a bite to eat before a police escort took us over, and I'm looking at all these people, and the crowd's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I just opened the window, And I sat there and watched the people go by and listened to what they had to say. The hotel that we were at was right on the boulevard there, and we played the show. And I swear, when we hit stage, the whisper before the roar that went up when they announced us, that could have been enough to just blow your head off, and we could all start running around the stage like kindergarten kids with ADD.
Oh.
But we fortunately we had enough experience with playing in front of big crowds that you just sort of take a deep breath and you put your head down and you play your music and everything. But the roar was just unbelievable. The show was great, and they got us back. They got us back to the hotel as a little postscript to this whole thing. And I remember saying to, I think it was Jimmy and Jack Gowdy, our road manager at the time, and I said, "Geez, would you want to just go to the bar and have a drink to try to settle down?" Because they were scraping us off the ceiling when we got back to the lobby of the hotel because it was such an amazing concert, and the crowd was just incredible and everything. So I got off on the 9th floor. I will never forget the floor I was on, and I heard all this noise, and I thought, what a rude thing. Here it is about almost midnight, and somebody's got a TV blaring on 10 or whatever. And then I realized as I got closer to my room that I had left the window open to my room, and the chair was in front of the window, and it was just the crowd talking about the concert. And it was a roar because there was so many of them that I sat back down in the chair for a minute and just listened to them talking, the comments about the show and us and everything,
that's awesome.
and just savored in the moment, and then went downstairs and Jack Gowdy, Jimmy Pankow, along with a couple about 75 years old, sat in the bar and had a drink or two, and this couple eventually said, "What do you guys do?" And, we looked at each other, and we said, "Not much." Just had our drink, and
beautiful.
And was, and it just comes to mind because we're talking about the area up there. It just came to mind, and I hope I didn't bore your.
You didn't, and I love stories about Philly.
That's it, and it's always been a great town from the Spectrum that we'd play, and a guy'd come up and jump on stage and shake Terry Kath's hand, whether we were playing 2 or 3 nights there. This fella, every year we could count on him coming up because he was a fan of Terry's and probably a guitar player. There was security up the yin-yang, but this guy got up on stage, and we knew he wasn't going to do anything weird, and he'd shake Terry's hand and jump off the stage, and we'd go on playing. We've been allowed, as I said at the beginning of our talk, our great talk here, we've been allowed to do something that we love to do, to create the things that we love to create, and to have people enjoy that.
Now we're going to do something, we're going to go back, because you played the original Electric Factory in Philadelphia, and I was there in 69 or 70, and you called out sick for that concert. Do you remember?
You know what?
That?
I've got the sweatshirt from that shirt.
Do you remember doing that?
Well, I remember the Maggot brothers were the ones that started the Electric Factory, and of course I do. This was this was sort of a funny thing. We were in New York, and we thought we were big shots. I think we all piled into a limo, all 7 of us. And and we're sitting on top of each other in a car, and I think the record company, was as part of promotion and everything, found a few bucks for this car, and we went from New York to Philadelphia in a limo, and probably got cramps and a bad back and all of that crazy stuff. But we pulled up in front of the Electric Factory in that car, and if it was one of the Maggot brothers, I think he was called Larry.
It was Larry Maggot. It was the Spivak brother. It was
the Spivak brother.
Alan, and I forgot his brother's name. Yes.
Yes, and we pulled up in front of there, and I think they looked at us like it was the Jitson music mobile that they were looking at. But I remember playing that gig, and that was that was the great thing about the time. There was all these kind of clubs across the country. When we played with Hendrix, we played the arenas, but the other nights when Hendrix would take nights off, there was always a club like the Electric Factory
or the Fillmores,
the Electric Circus, and every city in the country that you were able to play, and that's where we got our start. And if you saw us there, you were one of the I was there. I got to tell you, you saw the beginnings of Chicago, and you were part of an audience that grew into all of that crowd that was 1 million people, in the 80s. That was the 16,000 people that we'd play for 3 nights at the Spectrum was. But it all started at the Electric Factory, and I still got that sweatshirt from there.
And I remember sitting right at there you could lean on the stage.
Yes, you could.
And then around the outside of the club, they had coffins that you could lay in if you wanted to lay in a coffin.
You know what? My gosh, I'd forgotten that. But you know what? I'm sure that somewhere along the way we all laid in a coffin after we were on a break or something just to try it out. But you know what? That was a great place. And between the Spivak brothers and Larry Magid, that was a relationship that we had for quite a few years. And those, that was the days before all the corporate stuff happened and
Absolutely.
everything. And and I just. I have to tell you, when bands today say, geez, we want to start a band, how do we do these things and everything, I really have to give people credit, and I'll give them all the positive input that I possibly can. But that was sort of like, there was sort of a way that you could make your bones and cut your teeth on places like that to try out the material where people came. That was, and it was a performance, other than a club. And there was nothing wrong with clubs because that's, the upholstered sewers is where we came from and everything.
Right.
But it was that in-between step that you could really try everything out on guys like yourself and all the people that would come and say, hey, this band is pretty good. They don't have a record, or they just got a record. And we're going to see what they've got.
Well, of course, in those rooms were a great way for us to see everybody. Everybody
Yes.
played those rooms.
Well, I got to tell you, there. I think Alice Cooper played there. The Crazy World of Arthur Brown.
Well, I have photos of that concert. Yes, boy, that's crazy. I think that was Carl Palmer on drums.
Yes, and and Jay Giles. I mean, I'm just mentioning a few here, but we all came through those places.
But here's another one. Here's another one you came through, and I'm telling you how I know. Behind my desk in my office is an original steel pier poster with Chicago.
Well, those were 20-minute shows, and we did 6 a day.
They were 20-minute.
I don't remember 20-minute shows on the steel pier. And then, the Diving Horse, and you had Barney Cipriani, the diver, and you had Rosalie, who would do the Slide for Life on a wire. And we would come up we had a rent-a-car. I think it was a station wagon that we'd come from the hotel, and we'd come up pull up onto the boardwalk, and the guy at the saltwater taffy places we'd go to for the 20-minute show, he'd go, hey, there they go, Chicago CTA, there, hey, they're in person, in the flesh, now buy my saltwater taffy. And we'd do our 20 minutes and go back, and there was a miniature golf place right next door to the Holiday Inn we were staying at.
Boy.
We'd play some miniature golf and go back for another 20-minute show, and that Diving Horse and the guy Barney diving into the water, and Rosalie and a couple of, I think there was a chimpanzee act.
There was.
Also, later on when our daughters got a little older and we start playing Caesars, I went down to the area that was what was the old steel pier.
Sure.
And I had to show them where Pop played.
Oh, that's that's priceless.
And it was just it was a walk down memory lane, and it was all good, Mark.
I got to tell you, Walt Parazaider, this was an awesome interview, and I loved having you on here.
Well, you know what? The honor was all mine, Mark. And anybody that was at the Electric Factory is definitely got to come back after he sees us on. I don't know what night you're going to be in Atlantic City. You got to come back and say hello, because I've got to put a face to the voice. And I'm sure we could even tell a few more stories here. It's unbelievable. And this has been really a pleasure for me, and I want to thank everybody in your area, and also wish those musicians in this day and age, things aren't so easy. But you know what, guys and ladies also, like my dad would say to me when I was younger, keep punching and it's going to fall for you, and don't let anybody tell you you can't, because you can.
Walt Parazaider, thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
For up-to-the-minute information about Chicago, including tour dates, visit chicagotheband.com.
The Marc Berman Show is always on. Go to markberman.com for our podcasts of our past shows and interviews.